A routine traffic stop. A woman with nothing to hide. A cop drunk on power. When Officer Ryan Whitaker pulls over Olivia Carter, he believes she's just another black driver he can intimidate. But in just 1 week, their roles will be reversed, because the woman he humiliated will soon be the judge deciding his fate. What happens when justice comes full circle? If you believe in accountability and the power of truth, hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. And if you're ready for a story that will keep you on edge until the very end, stay with me, because this one is unforgettable. Chicago never truly sleeps. As the sun dips below the skyline, the city shifts into another rhythm. The hurried pace of the workday slows, replaced by the hum of nightlife, restaurants opening their doors to late-night patrons, neon signs flickering against rain-slicked pavement, and the occasional wail of a distant siren breaking the stillness. Olivia Carter guided her car down the quiet stretch of road leading toward home. The evening had been long, but rewarding. Another strategy meeting with civil rights advocates, another night spent discussing reform, fairness, and justice. It was work she had dedicated years of her life to, and in just a few days, it would become more than just advocacy. Soon, she would no longer be arguing cases in court. She would be the one deciding them. Judge Olivia Carter. The weight of it still felt surreal. She had fought for this moment, earned it through tireless work and unwavering conviction. Cook County's youngest judge, a title that carried both honor and an undeniable pressure. There would be scrutiny. Every ruling she made would be analyzed, debated. She had spent years proving herself in the legal field, and now she would have to do it all over again. But this time, with a gavel in her hand, she sighed, loosening her grip on the wheel, allowing the sound of soft jazz from the radio to settle over her like a familiar comfort. It was late, and she was ready to be home, to take a long shower and let the day wash away. Then, in her rearview mirror, red and blue lights appeared. Her heart tightened. A traffic stop. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't run a red light. Her registration was up to date. There was no reason for this. She felt it immediately, that sinking, familiar feeling. A tightening in her chest, a flicker of unease that wasn't rooted in guilt but in the reality of what this could be. She knew better than most that an interaction like this could go any number of ways. Her fingers instinctively tightened around the wheel before she forced herself to loosen them. Stay calm. Follow protocol. No sudden movements. Hands visible at all times. It was second nature by now. Rules that had been taught and reinforced not because they should be necessary, but because experience had shown her they were. She flicked on her turn signal, slowing the car as she eased onto the side of the road. Her breathing was steady, but her pulse was not. In the rearview mirror, she watched as the squad car pulled up behind her, headlights glaring, making it impossible to see the officer's face. A door opened. A figure stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of confidence that came from knowing the weight of authority was on his side. Her throat felt tight, but she swallowed down the unease. She had done nothing wrong, and yet that had never been a guarantee of safety. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed against the pavement. Then a firm knock on her window, and with it, the night took a sharp turn towards something she would never forget. The knock on the window was firm, deliberate. Olivia took a slow breath before reaching for the controls and rolling it down. The night air crept in, crisp and cool, but it did little to settle the warmth of unease pooling in her stomach. A man loomed beside her car, his silhouette sharp against the glare of flashing lights. Officer Ryan Whitaker. Mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with the hardened face of someone who had spent years enforcing the law and bending it when it suited him. His eyes swept over her, not with the neutral detachment of routine protocol, but with something else, something heavier, a quiet scrutiny, an unspoken judgment. "License and registration," he said. His voice was flat, cold, not a request but a demand. Olivia nodded, moving carefully. No sudden movements. She reached for her purse on the passenger seat, pulling out the documents. "May I ask why I was stopped, officer?" Her tone was polite, steady, carefully measured. Whitaker took the documents from her hand, glancing over them. The question hung between them, unanswered. Instead, he clicked his tongue, nodding slightly to himself, as if already deciding something about her. Then, finally, "You made a wide turn back there." A beat of silence. A wide turn. That was his excuse. Olivia held his gaze, but she didn't challenge him. She knew how this worked. The justification didn't need to hold up in court. It just needed to be enough to justify his presence at her window. Whitaker exhaled sharply, flicking her license back into his palm. "Step out of the vehicle." She didn't move. "Is there a reason for that, officer?" she asked, her voice still calm, though her fingers curled slightly against the steering wheel. His eyes hardened. "Step out now." There was no accusation, no cause, just a command. Olivia knew she had a choice. She could refuse, demand a valid reason, assert her rights. But she also knew how easily the situation could shift, how quickly a refusal could become non-compliance, how easily a command could escalate into force. Her pulse was steady, but inside, a war raged. She could challenge him, or she could step out. She exhaled slowly. Then, carefully, she unlocked the door and did as she was told. The pavement was cool beneath her heels as she straightened, her posture poised, controlled. Whitaker barely looked at her as he circled around, his hand resting near his holster. "Turn around," he ordered. She hesitated. "I don't consent to a search," she said, her voice firm. Whitaker's lips twitched, a smirk, almost amused. "That's so?" Without warning, his hands were on her. A firm grip, spinning her around, pressing her forward until her palms met the cold metal of her car's hood. The breath left her lungs in a sharp exhale. Her fingers curled into fists, but she didn't resist. She felt his hands patting her down, quick, rough, invasive, in a way that felt more like an assertion of dominance than a search for weapons. Her jaw clenched. He was enjoying this. She forced herself to stay still, to keep her breathing even. This wasn't new. Not for her. Not for people like her. She had spent years in courtrooms defending those who had been subjected to this very treatment. And now she was the one with her hands pressed against cold metal. When he finished, he stepped back. "Got anything in the car I need to know about?" "No," she said, her voice sharp now. Whitaker let the silence stretch. Then, with a nod, he moved toward the passenger side, pulling open the door without another word. She turned, watching as he rummaged through her glove compartment, her center console. The search was slow, methodical, not because he expected to find anything, but because he could. After a few minutes, he straightened, shutting the door with unnecessary force. Nothing. No contraband. No reason to hold her. Whitaker turned back to her, slipping her license and registration between two fingers. The corners of his mouth pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You can go," he said, stepping closer, his voice low. Then, as he handed her documents back, "Careful out there," he murmured, a cruel amusement lacing his words. "You look like the type that likes to start trouble." Olivia didn't respond, not because she had nothing to say, but because she knew that in this moment, words meant nothing. She took her documents, turned, and got back into her car. Her hands were steady as she started the engine. As she pulled away from the curb, she didn't look in the rearview mirror, didn't give him the satisfaction. But as she drove into the night, her hands gripped the wheel just a little tighter. Because she knew this wasn't over. The morning light streamed through the towering windows of the Cook County Courthouse, casting a warm glow over the polished marble floors. Olivia Carter adjusted the crisp black fabric of her judicial robe, feeling its weight settle over her shoulders. It was strange how something as simple as a robe could feel so heavy. Her first day on the bench. For years, she had fought for justice in courtrooms just like this, standing before judges, arguing cases, demanding fairness for those who had been wronged. And now, she wasn't arguing anymore. She was the one who would decide. The thought sent a flicker of anticipation through her chest, followed closely by a pang of responsibility. She had worked relentlessly for this moment, but the path ahead would be just as challenging. Every ruling, every decision would be scrutinized. People would doubt her, test her. She had spent years proving herself, and now she would have to do it all over again, except this time with a gavel in her hand. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself before sitting at her desk. The day's docket lay open before her, a list of cases waiting for her review. She traced her finger down the page, scanning the names and charges. Minor offenses, preliminary hearings, nothing unexpected. She saw it. A name that stopped her cold. Ryan Whitaker. Her breath stalled. The name burned into her mind, sharper than the paper it was printed on. For a moment, everything around her faded, the hum of voices outside her chambers, the steady tick of the clock on the wall. All she could see was that night, the flashing red and blue lights, the glare of the squad car's headlights, the weight of Whitaker's hands pressing her against the hood of her own car. She forced herself to keep reading. Charge, excessive force. Official misconduct. Victim, James Porter. Her stomach clenched. James Porter, a retired school teacher. A man known in his community for his kindness, his patience, his dedication to his students. A man who had likely assumed he was safe the night he was pulled over. Instead, he had left the encounter with a fractured arm and bruised ribs. Because of Ryan Whitaker. Her grip tightened on the edge of her desk. This wasn't just another case. It was a reckoning. A war raged inside her. She knew the ethical guidelines. She had a prior encounter with the defendant. That alone was enough for her to recuse herself. And yet, she closed the docket, pressing her fingertips against the smooth surface. She knew how this worked. If she stepped down, another judge would take her place. Someone who might be fair, or someone who might not. Someone who might see Whitaker's actions for what they were, or someone who might chalk it up to just another bad interaction. She had spent too many years watching men like him walk free. Too many cases dismissed, too many victims left without justice. She had sworn an oath to be impartial, but she had also sworn an oath to uphold the law. And the law needed to hold men like Whitaker accountable. A sharp knock on the door cut through her thoughts. "Come in," she said, her voice steady. The door swung open, and Naomi Brooks stepped inside. Dressed in plain clothes, her presence carried the weight of someone who had spent years working within the system, seeing the worst of it while trying to change it from the inside. Naomi gave her a long, measured look. "I heard Whitaker's on your docket." Olivia exhaled slowly. "Yeah." Naomi crossed her arms, leaning slightly against the desk. "You thinking about recusing yourself?" "I should," Olivia admitted, "but I don't know if I can." Naomi studied her for a beat before reaching into her jacket. She pulled out a manila folder, slightly worn at the edges, and placed it on the desk. "Before you decide, read this." Olivia hesitated only a moment before flipping it open. Inside were case files, complaints, dozens of them, reports from victims, witnesses, internal reviews that had led to nothing, unlawful stops, excessive force, racial profiling, false charges, all attributed to Ryan Whitaker. All dismissed. Olivia turned the pages, her throat tightening, and then she saw it. A case from 5 years ago. A suspect who had died in custody. The official report stated the use of force had been justified, but the autopsy report suggested something else. The bruising, the fractured ribs, the signs of suffocation. Witness accounts that contradicted Whitaker's statement. A case that had been quietly closed, buried beneath red tape and loopholes. A slow, simmering anger settled in her chest. This wasn't just about James Porter. It wasn't just about what had happened to her. This was about a pattern. A system that had let Whitaker get away with this for years. A badge that had protected him more than it had ever protected the people he was supposed to serve. She shut the folder, meeting Naomi's gaze. "I'm not stepping down." Naomi didn't look surprised. Instead, a small smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Didn't think you would." Olivia sat back in her chair, the weight of the decision settling over her. In a few minutes, she would step into that courtroom. She would look Ryan Whitaker in the eye, and this time, she wouldn't be the one on the other side of the law. This time, she would be the one delivering justice. The courtroom was still, filled only with the quiet shuffling of papers and the occasional murmur between attorneys. The air held a certain weight, the kind that always settled before something significant. Olivia Carter sat at the bench, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. This was her domain now. She had presided over exactly 0 cases before this moment, but no one in the room would have guessed it. The doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Ryan Whitaker entered. He walked with confidence, shoulders squared, movements controlled. The same air of authority, the same self-assured presence he had carried that night on the street. The same man who had humiliated her, who had pressed her against the hood of her own car like she was nothing. To him, this was just another hearing. Another routine day. Olivia didn't move, didn't react, simply let the moment play out. Whitaker strode toward the defendant's table, nodding to his attorney, his expression bored, as if this was an inconvenience rather than a consequence. He took his seat without so much as a glance toward the bench. Then Olivia spoke. Case number 2023-48115. The State of Illinois versus Officer Ryan Whitaker. Silence. Whitaker's head lifted, his body going rigid. Then slowly he turned to face her. At first, confusion. His brows pulled together slightly, his eyes narrowing as if something about her was familiar but not quite placeable. And then, recognition. His entire body stiffened. The shift was almost imperceptible, a slight hitch in his breath, the flicker of something behind his eyes. The confidence he had carried just moments ago cracked. Olivia held his gaze, unwavering. There was no smirk on his face now, no arrogance, no power games, just realization. She let the silence stretch, let him sit in it, let the understanding settle deep into his bones. He turned to his lawyer so abruptly it was almost frantic. The man, a well-groomed attorney in an expensive suit, leaned in, listening intently as Whitaker muttered something under his breath. The lawyer nodded once, then stood. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "we respectfully request that this case be reassigned due to a conflict of interest." Olivia tilted her head slightly. "And what would that conflict be, Counselor?" The lawyer cleared his throat. "It has come to my client's attention that Your Honor may have had a prior interaction with him outside of this courtroom. We believe this raises concerns about impartiality, and therefore, we move for immediate recusal." A few murmurs rippled through the gallery, attorneys exchanging glances, waiting to see how she would respond. Olivia remained composed. She folded her hands neatly in front of her. Then, with practiced calm, she spoke. "The time for that request has passed." Whitaker's jaw clenched. The defendant had ample opportunity to file such a motion before these proceedings began, Olivia continued, her voice steady, unshaken. If there was concern about a conflict of interest, it should have been raised through the proper channels. It was not. The trial will proceed. A muscle twitched in Whitaker's jaw. He leaned in toward his attorney again, his movements tighter now, controlled but barely. His lawyer whispered something back to him, something meant to pacify. But Olivia saw it. The fear. The realization. For the first time, Ryan Whitaker was in a position where his badge wouldn't protect him. For the first time, he wasn't the one holding the power. And that, more than anything, was what terrified him the most. The courtroom was tense, a thick silence stretching between the walls. All eyes were on the screen as the prosecutor, a composed but relentless man named Adrian Lowe, pressed play. The grainy cell phone footage flickered to life. The shaky angle suggested it had been taken from across the street, but what it captured was unmistakable. James Porter, a retired schoolteacher, stood beside his car, his hands raised in a gesture of confusion, maybe even compliance. The streetlights illuminated the moment clearly, Ryan Whitaker stepping forward, shoving him once, then again, harder. Porter stumbled back, his body barely catching itself before Whitaker's hands found him again. This time there was no balance to regain. He was slammed onto the pavement. The courtroom was so quiet that the muffled audio of the video could be heard clearly. Porter's voice, strained, desperate. "Please, I'm not resisting." Then the sharp sound of something, bone hitting concrete. And the final words on the recording before the witness had stopped filming. "Why are you doing this?" When the video ended, Olivia let the silence linger. She watched as Whitaker sat rigid at the defense table, his eyes fixed straight ahead. The confidence from earlier was gone, replaced by something darker. A man calculating, scrambling for an escape, but there was none. The prosecutor stepped forward, holding a printed copy of the police report. "Officer Whitaker," Lowe said, addressing the defendant, "in your official statement you claimed that Mr. Porter resisted arrest and reached for your weapon. You also claimed that you had no choice but to use force to protect yourself. Is that correct?" Whitaker's lawyer, seated beside him, tensed but didn't object. Whitaker exhaled sharply, gripping the edges of the table. His voice, when he finally spoke, was rough, forced. "Yes," he muttered. Lowe nodded, flipping through the pages. "And yet, the video we just watched shows Mr. Porter raising his hands, stepping back, and verbally pleading for you to stop. There is no indication of him reaching for a weapon. There is no indication of him resisting. So, I ask you again, did Mr. Porter truly pose a threat, or did you escalate the situation unnecessarily?" The question hung between them. Whitaker's jaw tightened, his fingers curling into fists against the polished wood. Lowe didn't wait for an answer. He turned toward the judge's bench, his expression impassive. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to submit additional evidence into the record, an investigative report compiled by Internal Affairs Officer Naomi Brooks." The name alone sent a ripple through the room. Olivia's eyes flickered toward Naomi, who had been sitting quietly in the gallery until now. Without hesitation, she stood, walking toward the prosecution table. She handed over a thick file, and Lowe placed it on the evidence stand. "This report," he continued, "contains findings from multiple unresolved complaints against Officer Whitaker, complaints that were either dismissed without thorough investigation or buried under administrative delays." Whitaker shifted in his seat, a flash of irritation crossing his face. Lowe flipped open the file, revealing rows of names, dates, statements. "Excessive force," he read aloud. "Unlawful detainment, coerced confessions, and..." He paused, letting the next words land. "The death of a suspect in custody 5 years ago." A murmur broke through the courtroom. Whitaker's lawyer stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. The prosecution is introducing prejudicial information unrelated to the present case." Olivia kept her expression neutral. Sustained. "The jury will disregard the last statement." But she knew the damage was done. The jury had heard it. The gallery had heard it. Whitaker had heard it. And the look in his eyes told her everything. He knew this was slipping beyond his control. Lowe continued. "While we acknowledge that the details of prior allegations may not be directly relevant to today's charges, they establish a clear pattern of conduct, one that the jury has the right to consider." Whitaker's breathing was heavier now, his shoulders squared, but tension radiated from him. Then the moment broke. He snapped. Whitaker shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. His voice, laced with fury, cut through the room. "This is a goddamn setup," he barked. She planned this. This isn't justice. This is payback. She's got a vendetta because I pulled her over." The entire courtroom went still. Gasps, mutters, the kind of shock that ripples through a room when someone has just revealed far more than they intended to. His lawyer reached for his sleeve, hissing something under his breath, but Whitaker wasn't listening. His face was red with anger, with desperation. Olivia finally spoke. Her voice, in contrast to his, was steady, controlled. "Officer Whitaker," she said evenly, "are you stating under oath that you detained me unlawfully?" A flash of realization crossed his face. He had just implicated himself. The entire case was about his pattern of abuse, his history of targeting black citizens under the guise of law enforcement, and he had just confessed to doing exactly that, to her. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. She let the silence stretch, watching the reality settle over him. Then, in the calmest voice she could muster, she said, "You just admitted to misconduct on the record, officer, but I am not the one who will determine your guilt today." She let that sink in before finishing. "The jury will." A heavy quiet blanketed the courtroom. Whitaker slowly lowered himself back into his seat, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles had turned white. For the first time, the weight of the trial, the weight of actual consequences, seemed to settle over him. He had always believed himself untouchable. Until now. The courtroom was silent, save for the slow, deliberate steps of the bailiff as he carried the sealed verdict to the judge's bench. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone. Jurors sitting rigid in their seats, attorneys holding their breath, spectators frozen in anticipation. Ryan Whitaker sat at the defense table, jaw tight, hands clasped together. This was the moment he had never truly believed would come. The moment when his fate was no longer in his control. Olivia Carter kept her posture steady, her expression unreadable. She had watched every second of this trial unfold, had seen the evidence laid bare, had heard the pain in James Porter's voice as he recounted the night he was beaten for no reason other than an officer's unchecked power. She had seen defendants in this very seat before, but never a man like Whitaker. A man who had worn a badge not as a duty, but as a weapon. A man who had believed himself untouchable. Until now. She turned to the jury foreman, who stood holding the slip of paper that would decide everything. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" A slow nod. "We have, Your Honor." The tension in the room thickened. Olivia gave a brief nod in return. Please read the verdict." The foreman unfolded the paper, cleared his throat, and spoke. "On the charge of excessive force, we find the defendant guilty." A ripple of movement spread through the courtroom. Gasps, hushed whispers, the realization setting in. Whitaker didn't move. "On the charge of official misconduct, we find the defendant guilty." Whitaker's fingers curled into fists. His attorney exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. The weight of those two words settled over everything. Guilty. For the first time in his career, his actions had consequences. Olivia let the moment breathe before she spoke. "The jury has delivered its verdict. The court will now move to sentencing." The prosecutor stood, requesting the maximum penalty under state law, arguing that Whitaker had not only abused his authority, but had done so repeatedly, leaving a trail of victims who had never seen justice. The defense fought back, pleading for leniency, pointing to his years of service, to his commendations, as if those outweighed the harm he had caused. Olivia listened. She weighed every argument, every fact. And then, when all voices had been heard, she made her ruling. "Ryan Whitaker," she began, her voice steady, resolute. "This court finds that you abused your position of authority, violated the public trust, and inflicted harm on those you were sworn to protect. The evidence has made it clear that your actions were not mistakes, not lapses in judgment, but a pattern, one that this court cannot ignore." She let that sink in before delivering the final blow. "You are hereby sentenced to 5 years in state prison. You will also be stripped of your badge and police pension, and you will pay restitution to the victim, James Porter, for medical expenses and damages." The sound of the gavel striking the bench rang through the courtroom. It was done. Whitaker finally looked at her, not with the smug arrogance he had worn the night he shoved her against the hood of her car, not with the quiet calculation he had carried when he first walked into this courtroom, but with pure, unfiltered hatred. He shook his head slowly, exhaling a bitter laugh before muttering under his breath, "You think you can change the system?" His voice was low, but it carried. For the first time, Olivia let her composure break, just enough for something deeper to surface. Not satisfaction, not vengeance, but conviction. She met his gaze head-on. "A single verdict doesn't change the system," she said, her voice even. "But if we don't fight, nothing ever will." Whitaker didn't say another word. The bailiff approached, snapping the handcuffs around his wrists. The clinking of metal against metal filled the room as Whitaker was pulled to his feet. He was no longer the man holding power, no longer the man who walked away untouched. And as he was led from the courtroom, he finally understood what it meant to be held accountable. The press would swarm, headlines would spread, debates would rage. Some would celebrate this as a victory. Others would argue it was a political move, an attack on law enforcement. But Olivia Carter knew one thing. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with others. Conversations about justice and accountability matter, and your voice helps spread awareness. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that shed light on truth, resilience, and the fight for fairness. Your support means the world to us. It's what drives us to keep bringing you meaningful content. Thank you for watching, and remember, change starts with awareness. Let's keep the conversation going. See you in the next story.